gonna need you to put your hands behind your back.
Wait, what?
Put your hands behind your back.
Wait,
Don't fight.
On November 21st, in the city of Cape Coral, Florida, police appeared at the front door of a woman who was already known to many people on TikTok. Not a fugitive suspect, not someone living on the margins of society,
Don't fight it. Don't fight it.
but Marlena Lynn Velez, a familiar face associated with content about beauty, skincare, and family life. When the police arrived, Marlena was at home with her two small children. One was just 3 years old. The other was only 1. Within just a few short minutes, the atmosphere inside that family home shifted from ordinary to tense. She was forced to call the children's grandmother to come watch them before she was taken in for questioning. And that very moment is what makes this story so unusual. Because it did not begin with a car chase in the street, nor with a brazen robbery caught in the act. It began with what seemed like a minor accusation, yet one that exposed a quiet form of fraud many retail stores face today: barcode switching at self-checkout. When people hear the phrase stealing from a supermarket, many imagine someone stuffing items into a bag and running straight out the door. But in this case, according to the allegation, everything was far more subtle. No shouting, no scuffle, no need to break locks or snatch anything by force, just a few motions in front of the scanner, a few items passed over the counter, a receipt that appeared legitimate, and one person leaving the store like any other shopper. It is precisely that normalcy that makes the story so hard to believe. And that is why this case drew so much attention online. A TikToker who built her image around family, everyday life, and highly relatable content was accused of retail fraud, and police showed up at her home. The immediate questions are, what exactly happened? Was this a spontaneous mistake or a deliberate act? And what leads someone who lives in the public eye, accustomed to the attention of thousands, to allegedly carry out a scheme that seems small on the surface but carries very real consequences? What needs to be said right away is that this was not just a transaction off by a few dollars. According to the case information, the total value of the goods involved was around $500. That figure is not enough to make this a major financial crime, but it is large enough to show that this was not a trivial or impulsive act. The items mentioned included children's clothing and household goods, the kind of everyday products that easily blend into ordinary shopping. Yet, when added together, their total value is enough to turn a series of seemingly small actions into a criminal case. What makes the situation more serious is that the accused was not an anonymous customer. Marlena Lynn Velez was known as a TikTok content creator. Her image was not one of rebellion or controversy, but of beauty, skincare, family, and daily life. When someone like that becomes entangled in allegations of retail fraud, the public does not focus only on the money. They focus on the contrast. On one side is the image, carefully built in public view. On the other is a real-world legal record. Here, what gives the case its emotional weight is not simply the $500 figure. It is the fact that those $500 appear in the context of someone whose public life depends on trust, familiarity, and a sense of closeness with viewers. When the audience looks at this story, they do not just see a suspect. They see a young mother, a content creator, a face that once appeared in videos about self-care, childcare, product recommendations, and the routines of everyday life. But the more ordinary someone appears, the more shocking the fall becomes. That sense of normalcy is exactly what makes people think, she doesn't seem like the kind of person who would get involved in something like this. And when the legal reality runs directly against that perception, the story instantly becomes compelling. It makes viewers want to know, how did someone making short videos about family life and beauty end up at the point where police were knocking on her door? Marlena Lynn Velez was not famous in the way a traditional entertainment celebrity would be. She was known as a TikToker, a content creator in the world of social media, a space where many people build their own communities through small slices of everyday life. Marlena's content revolved around beauty tips, skincare products, and family life. Its appeal did not come from drama, but from familiarity. People watched because they saw something close and relatable in it, a picture of ordinary life, even the feeling of watching someone they might know in real life. What is notable about people like Marlena is that they do not simply post videos. They build an image. And that image is often based on a sense of trust. A young mother, a woman sharing personal experiences, someone offering beauty suggestions, someone talking about family, someone who makes viewers feel, she's like me. That is what creates connection on a platform like TikTok. It is not just the content, it is the sense of authenticity. And that is precisely why, when someone like that is accused of a crime, the public often reacts more strongly than usual. Not because the amount of money is always greater, or because the conduct is always more serious, but because it breaks the image that had already been established. Viewers are not only disappointed by the alleged act itself, they are shocked by the gap between the person on the screen and the person in the police file. That is why a character's background is always important in a true crime-style video. It shows that people do not always begin in darkness. Sometimes they enter a criminal story from a place that looks completely ordinary: work, family, social media, daily routines. They do not need to look like criminals to eventually become involved in a criminal case. In this situation, the contrast is especially strong. On one side is the image of skincare, motherhood, and family life. On the other is an allegation of fraud at self-checkout. And the story becomes compelling precisely because it forces viewers to ask, how thin is the line, really, between an ordinary person and someone accused of a crime? To fully understand this case, we need to pause for a moment and talk about how self-checkout works. This is a model used by major retailers like Target to reduce wait times, ease pressure on cashiers, and make shopping faster. Customers pick up their own items, scan the barcodes themselves, see the prices appear on the screen, and then pay by card or cash. It sounds convenient, and it truly is. But because part of the process is handed over to customers, the system also relies on something invisible, yet extremely important: trust. When a cashier scans items, there is a person directly checking the product and its price. But when customers do everything themselves, the machine only knows what is passed in front of it. It does not understand the item the way a human eye does. It only reads barcode data. If the barcode is correct, the system charges correctly. If the barcode is wrong, the system records the wrong price. And that is where a method known as barcode switching comes in. At its core, this is a way of making the machine believe that an expensive item is actually a cheap one. A person may use the barcode of a low-cost product and scan it in place of the real barcode on a higher-priced item. The result is that a receipt is still printed, the payment process still appears normal, but the amount paid does not reflect the true value of the items taken out of the store. That is why this kind of fraud is more dangerous than it looks on the surface. Outwardly, everything appears legitimate. The person does not run out of the store. They do not hide merchandise in their clothing. There is no loud alarm going off instantly. They still pay, but they are paying the wrong amount for the wrong item. That is what causes many people to think it is not theft in the usual sense. But from a legal perspective, if someone deliberately uses a scheme to obtain goods for far less than their true value, it is still the unlawful taking of property. For people who have never heard of barcode switching, Marlena's case is a very typical example of the vulnerability in the self-checkout system. Technology helps stores move faster, but technology can also be exploited if the person standing in front of the machine decides to manipulate it. And once cameras, scan data, transaction history, and store security are involved, something that at first seemed like nobody would notice can later be traced back very clearly. Marlena was accused of carrying out exactly that kind of fraud. Specifically, she was alleged to have used the barcode of a cheaper item, often worth only around $1, and scanned it in place of the real barcode on products with much higher value. The items mentioned included children's clothes and household goods, which are very common products and can easily blend into an ordinary shopping cart. An important detail is that the method was not always as obvious as simply sticking a label onto a product in a way anyone would notice. According to the description, the cheaper barcode could be placed over the original one, or held in the palm of her hand and passed over the scanner instead of the real barcode. In other words, rather than the machine reading the actual code of the item being scanned, it read a different code, one that was far less expensive. From the system's point of view, the transaction still looked legitimate, but in reality, the item going across the scanner and the item listed on the receipt no longer matched. This is the how it worked section, the core of the case. It shows that the alleged conduct was not a simple moment of impulse. It required the person carrying it out to understand the weakness of self-checkout, to prepare a low-cost barcode in advance, and to be confident enough to perform the action in front of the scanner without drawing attention. That creates the impression of a deliberate scheme rather than a simple shopping mistake. What causes many people to underestimate this type of fraud is that it does not resemble the classic image of shoplifting. But in substance, it is still the intentional taking of property worth far more than the amount paid. The only difference is that the person uses the checkout process itself to conceal the act of taking it. And that is also why cases like this often come to light only when store security later reviews video footage, compares receipts, and checks scan data for irregularities. A single machine may be fooled for a few seconds, but the surveillance system of a major retail chain is not so easy to fool. What makes the Marlena Lynn Velez case so attention-grabbing is not only the $500 amount, and not only the fact that she was a TikToker. What makes people stop and pay attention is that the story touches something very familiar in modern society. We increasingly hand more and more tasks over to automated systems, yet those systems still operate on the oldest and most fragile foundation of all: trust that people will not deliberately cheat. Self-checkout was designed to make everything faster, easier, and less friction-filled. But when someone chooses to exploit it, that convenience itself becomes a vulnerability. And then, with just a few minutes, a few items, and a few incorrect scans, the consequences may extend far beyond a receipt. They can reach the police, court records, probation, store bans, reputation, work, and family. This case also reminds us of something very simple that people often underestimate. Acts dismissed as small, insignificant, or who would ever check can sometimes be the things that leave the most lasting consequences. A small fraud in the eyes of the person doing it can become a major turning point in their life. It is not only about the merchandise taken, it is about how one wrong decision can spread into every other part of life, from a person's online image to the way other people see them in the real world. And that is why stories like this make viewers feel both curious and unsettled. Curious because the mechanism of the crime seems so simple, unsettled because the price paid feels so real. A person who once appeared in everyday videos about beauty and family care ultimately ended up being mentioned in a criminal story for allegedly trying to outsmart a supermarket scanner. From a storytelling perspective, it is the collapse of trust. From a legal perspective, it is the consequence of a chain of choices. If there is one message left behind by this case, it may be this: technology can help people save time, but it does not erase personal responsibility. And sometimes, what causes someone to fall is not some grand plan, but simply the belief that they are clever enough to outsmart a system for a few brief seconds.